Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, it is a pleasure to be here among you to talk about this is very, very sensitive and very important subject about terrorism. Actually, I'm coming from an area which is actually fighting at least 5 wars against terrorism. Also, I have been researching this subject for years, and I don't know whether I was privileged or not. You know, I spent 3 days with Osama bin Laden in Tora Bora and his caves there. And also, when I researched my recent book, The Islamic State, The Digital Caliphate, I managed to meet some of those Daesh or Islamic State actually members. So I'm trying to explain what is happening in our part of the world. You know, we as Arabs, we used to be well known of exporting oil. Now we are exporting terrorism and immigrations, unfortunately. Many people questions why our area actually turned to this fate. What is happening in that part of the world? Mr. Amita, the Afghani National Security Advisor, he actually delivered excellent talks about the subject, but unfortunately he did not name names, maybe because of his position. I will name names. You know, we have the privilege to be journalist, writer, analyst, so we will name names. Before we understand what is happening in our part of the world and why terrorism actually is part and integrity of the Middle East, there are about 6 or 7 key words. Without actually understanding these words and what is behind them, we will never understand the Middle East and we will never succeed in fighting terrorism. The first one is humiliation. People in the Middle East are humiliated by their government and humiliated by foreign powers. The second word is frustration. People in the Middle East are frustrated simply because there are 60% of our population under the age of 26. And, you know, the unemployment is more than 30%, despite being one of the richest countries in the world. At the top of that, there is no future for our next generation because of these wars, which are endless wars. The fourth word is underestimation. When we say underestimation, there is a lot of understanding of the terrorism and why it is happening and rising that way. Underestimation is, you know, for example, if we take the Syrian questions, billions of dollars and thousands of tons of hardwares, ammunition, weapons actually were poured to that part of the world, and most of it actually ended in the hands of the terrorists, simply because they want actually to topple the regime in Syria, not to fight terrorism, and they create terrorism. The fifth word of the fourth word is marginalization and exclusion. You know, if the Shia are ruling, they are excluding or marginalizing the Sunni. If the Sunni ruling, they are marginalizing the Shia minorities. The same thing, if the Arabs are ruling, again the Kurds will be marginalized. So this is the problem. Marginalization is extremely spreading in our part of the world. The most important other words actually is the lack of good governance. We don't have a good governance in our part of the world. Corruption is the name of the game there. You know, if you look at the Middle East, we actually received more than $5 trillion in the last 10 years as our revenue. Where is it? Saudi Arabia now is actually imposing austerity measures against their own people. And they are going to financial markets to have loans. Where are our money? Where is corruption? This is actually the fact. Corruption is actually dominating the whole region. And the other word is the foreign military intervention. And this is actually the most important words. Military intervention. American military intervention. Western military intervention in our part of the world. This is actually wherever and whenever there is American military intervention, there is a failed state. And there is the best incubation for terrorism and for terrorists. Look at the situation. Look at Iraq, for example. What is happening in Iraq? We didn't have terrorism in Iraq before the American intervention. No Al-Qaeda, no Islamic State, no Salafism at all. But when the American intervention took place, look what happened. Now it is Al-Qaeda, it is Islamic States, it is a civil war, you name it. In Afghanistan, before the military intervention in Afghanistan, we did not have Al-Qaeda. But when the American invaded Afghanistan, or intervened in Afghanistan, we had Al-Qaeda. And this is very obvious. And nobody can deny that. The same thing is happening now in Yemen, the same thing is happening in Syria, the same thing happening in Iraq. Also, the other words which I'd like to talk about is the revolution of the social media. Before, we had a very autocratic regimes, and we still have them. So there is no freedom of expression. There is no any kind of actually free media or free expressions. It's all dominated by the governments. Now, it's everywhere. It is actually changing the whole thing. And the terrorist organization manipulating the social media for their own interest. When I say manipulating, in one stage, the Islamic State or Daesh used to have 50,000 accounts on the Twitter only. 50,000 accounts. And they used to actually tweet about 100,000 tweets every day. And they were actually very vicious, and they use the social media for recruitment and for spreading their ideology. To make it simple for you, during Osama bin Laden time, say 20 years ago, poor Osama bin Laden, an old man sitting in front of a camera, recording a videotape and begging Al Jazeera to broadcast it. Or actually, he will be extremely lucky if the CNN had a few seconds of it, or maybe 1 minute or 2 minutes out of it. And it's a very, very difficult process to smuggle the videotape from Afghanistan to Karachi, to Peshawar, wherever, and then to Doha, and after that to the different parts of the world. Now, his actually rival, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, he doesn't need all this process. He just in a press of a button, just 1 second, few seconds, his videotape, audio tapes, his literature spreading all over the world without any difficulties. And we can see it. He doesn't need Al Jazeera, he doesn't need CNN, he doesn't need anybody. So it shows you how those people actually are very active, very influential, and using this social media for their interest. And because of that, actually, they managed to recruit more than 100,000 people in their books. When we say about marginalization, again, Mr. Atmar, the Afghani National Security, he said we shouldn't use non-state actors against each other in order to win. But I would like to remind you what happened and why the Islamic State or Daesh is now emerging. Simply because Mr. Bremer, the first American ruler of Iraq, he dissolved the Iraqi army. He dissolved the national security. He dissolved the Republican Guards, and he marginalized those people. They, and they were arrested, and they were tortured, and thrown to the streets without any pension, without any salaries, nothing at all. What do you expect those people to do in a country like Iraq, for example? Definitely, they will turn to terrorism, and that was actually the first step or the first stone of establishing the Islamic State. Mr. David Petraeus, he started the whole process. David Petraeus was the military ruler or in charge of the American forces in Iraq. He created Sahwat, the awakening groups. He recruited 100,000 of them. He armed them. He financed them. So he wanted to use them against Al-Qaeda. And those people, again, were the nucleus of the Islamic State. They're the incubator of the Islamic State. They met with the Salafis in Buka prison. Buka prison, it's Iraqi prison, established by the American rulers, military rulers, and it started from there. What I want to say, actually, if we want to fight terrorism, we have to look at that part of the world which is exporting most of them. What is happening in Libya, for example? Libya was a stable country. What happened in Syria? Syria was a stable country. What is happening in Iraq? Iraq was a stable country. Have you noticed one thing? You know, those Americans who are coming to our part of the world to actually topple regimes, the secular American, what they did, actually, they inflamed the sectarian division on the Arab world. We never had this sectarian division. When I say sectarian division, I'm very clear here. You know, they said, okay, the Al-Qaeda is Sunni, so we have to support the Shia, for example, against the Sunni. And they actually, when they introduce this kind of sectarian division, once they are there, and actually they made it like part for the Sunni, part for the Shia. The foreign minister should be Kurds, and something like this. Anyway, so this is the problem we are facing. The failed state. We have this failed state in that part of the world. So how we are going to deal with it? How can we solve the problem in Yemen, for example? Now we have Yemen. Al-Qaeda is emerging again in Yemen, and strongly, simply because Yemen now is an open for them. Islamic State now is, okay, there is a war against them in Mosul and another war against them in Syria. So what will happen to them? They have a plan B. They have a plan B for them. What is plan B? Plan B is to go underground and to actually take the same routes like Al-Qaeda, start hitting here and hitting there. And they are opening branches in most of the Middle Eastern countries. Al-Qaeda is the same, as I said, just a week ago, they actually managed to unify all these factions in the Sahel area of Africa under one organization. So plan B for the Islamic State, plan B for Al-Qaeda is coming. Plan B for the Islamic State is to go underground. Why to go underground? Simply because they are, maybe going underground is the best gift for them. Yeah, after they are going to be defeated in Mosul, and they will be defeated in Mosul, and they will be defeated in Raqqa, because there are 50 countries fighting them, and two of them a superpower. For the first time, the Russian and the American agreed on one common enemy, which is the Islamic State. The same thing, Iran and Saudi Arabia, for example, they are unified against one thing, is to root out the Al-Qaeda, Daesh or the Islamic State. So plan B for them is to go underground. They will get rid of the burden of running huge cities, for example, like Mosul with 2 million. You have to supply them with water, with electricity, with health, with education, with security, with everything. So how can they do that? In the beginning, when they started, when I talk about underestimation, they used to export about $3 million equal of oil barrels all over the world, and $3 million, which is a huge income for an state actor or a terrorist organization. And who they used to sell their oil to? Syrian government, to Turkish government, to Kurdistan of north of Iraq. So even they used to find a lot of customers who are welcoming these kind of okay. The chairman said 2 minutes. Oh my God, talk about that. This is the problem, we are facing. Anyway, so what I want to say, the Islamic State is coming, and Al-Qaeda is coming, and simply because we created the incubator for them. The foreign intervention still continue to prevail in that part of the world. Yemen is the best place for Al-Qaeda, and the Islamic State are building bases there. Also, Iraq, how can you solve the problem of Iraq after that? We need a reconciliation. We need people to work together. We need coexistence. Is it coincidence that most of these countries facing the destruction, facing the marginalization, facing actually the foreign intervention, the sectarian governments, or the government used to have coexistence? This is the problem. The Americans supposed to be secular. And so Libya used to be, the coexistence in Libya used to be in its best. Syria, we never knew who is Shia, who is Sunni, who is Alawite, simply because people living together. Iraq, the same thing. Iraq was a very, very secular, people coexist with each other. It is very difficult for anybody to differentiate between Sunni and Shia. Yemen, despite the corruption of Ali Abdullah Saleh, it used to be a very, very stable country and no terrorism at all. And when Al-Qaeda tried to build bases, it was actually fought very effectively by the government and also by the American drones. So this is the problem. We are losing the coexistence in our part of the world. And without having a good governance, most of the countries which their regime changed in our part of the world turned to a failed state and turned to a civil war or whatever. So this is the problem we are facing. I ending by saying, we want the American to leave us alone. We want the European to leave us alone. We can manage. We did manage. This is the problem. We have to name names. They are creating the incubation for terrorism. They are encouraging that. They are the first to use Islamic Salafist, Islamic extremism in Afghanistan, and before that against Soviet Union. This is the problem. Nobody would like to say it. And I'm surprised, that the advisor of national security in Afghanistan saying the American will solve the problem. The American, they wouldn't solve the problem in Afghanistan. They wouldn't solve the problem in Iraq. They wouldn't solve the problem in Yemen. They wouldn't solve the problem in Libya, simply because they created these problems. Thank you.